Well, hello there, it's Antrice, and welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter podcast. You know, until I started my own podcast, I had no idea how much work it takes to keep one going. That's why so many podcasts disappear so quickly. Did you know that the average podcast lasts less than 6 months? And even when you include mega hits like NPR Serial or This American Life or one of my favorites, On Being, all told, the average podcast gets less than 300 downloads per episode. Savvy Painter averages more than 7,000 unique downloads. And there's even some that are 25,000. Apparently, I'm doing something right. And look, I know it's not perfect, but I have somehow managed to keep this podcast going for more than 4 years by myself. I am no Ira Glass or Terry Gross, but did you know that they have an average of 15 to 20 people working on each episode, doing research, coordinating guests, creating graphics, writing scripts, keeping the website up, keeping the technology working, handling promotions and social media and marketing, and still responding to listeners? They have a whole team working behind the scenes so that the host can focus on the interviews. Guess who does all of that for Savvy Painter? I do. It's me, all by myself. It's a lot of work. They also have people who edit the podcast, handle the sound engineering, write the show notes, upload the final episode for distribution, and upload and publish all of that to all of the podcast channels and the website so that listeners can just click a button and hear an episode. I work with an amazing company called Podcast Fast Tracks who does all of that for me. And thank God, because if I didn't have them, I would be curled up in a little ball in the corner of my studio. Point being, there is a ton of work that you never see, and it's not cheap. It costs about $1,000 a month to keep Savvy Painter going, and that's because I do most of it myself. My guess is you had no idea what happens behind the scenes to make sure that you get an episode every other week without fail. I had no idea either before I started, which is probably a good thing. So I'm asking for your help to keep this podcast going. A small monthly donation makes all the difference. It's just the price of a cup of coffee or a single tube of student-grade earth tone paint. I'm not talking professional cadmiums or cobalt violet or anything weird like that. Just the most basic burnt umber. Just a small donation like that from you would help a lot to keep this podcast going. You can make a difference. At a minimum, I would love it if I didn't have to explain to my accountant why I'm still doing that quote-unquote little podcast. Go to savvypainter.com/support. Big or small, your contribution matters. Thank you so very much. My guest today is the artist Cecil Touchon. Cecil creates collage and paintings out of typographic elements. His paintings are called Post-Dogmatic paintings. The name of each of his paintings starts with the prefix PDP and is followed by a number, which is the sequential number of the painting in his long-standing series of works. The numbering system began in the 1980s, and he has maintained it throughout his career. In this episode, Cecil and I talk about some of the differences he has noticed from when he was an artist in his 20s versus his 40s versus now as an artist in his 60s. Cecil talks about having work that he shows and work that's private, work that he creates only for his personal development. He was inspired by an idea he got from the composer John Cage, which was do something until it's boring and then keep doing it, and it will start penetrating. This opens up new vistas of possibilities that on your own, you wouldn't bother to look for unless you were plowing deeper and deeper into your practice. Cecil also shares his ideas about how an artist sees, how our focus, both psychologically and visual, determine what we will see and what we will ignore. I'd like to thank the artist Ginny Gardner for introducing me to Cecil and his work. Here is Cecil Touchon. Cecil, welcome to the Savvy Painter podcast. I am very happy to talk with you today. I'm so glad we finally got to get together.
Yeah, it's taken a little while to get the schedule all straightened out and online. So that's cool. Yeah, I think it's been months actually since we first started talking about it. But here we are finally. Yay.
Well, thank you for your persistence and putting up with all this scheduling nonsense. And I'm so glad that Jenny got me in touch with you. Would you share a little bit about when you decided to make this your vocation in life?
Like I'm sure many of the other artists that are listening in, I certainly think of myself as a natural born artist. So I didn't really have an idea to do something else all the way since a little kid. It's just a matter of working through other people's resistance to the idea and figuring out how to develop a lifestyle that is conducive to being an artist. So already in grade school, that was already my plan. In fact, I used to get in trouble in second grade for adding a bunch of flourishes to the letters instead of just writing it the way you're supposed to write, because we're supposed to learn how to write. But then I went to Catholic grade school all the way through eighth grade, so I started getting good at making satirical drawings of the nuns for my buddies, and we'd sit around in class and I'd do my little protest by drawing one of the teachers doing something embarrassing or who knows what, and get a snicker going in the back of the room. I was always sort of a revolutionary type anyway. As a Catholic grade school kid, you're always in a state of continuous resistance. So, we would eventually, once we started feeling pretty unified as a group, we'd create these little events. And the one that really comes to mind was everybody was supposed to push their pencil off the desk at exactly a certain moment so that she couldn't punish the entire class. So we all felt like basically prisoners of war, I guess. But it was fun.
It was fun. You managed to make it fun.
Yeah, I remember we had this one teacher in the fourth grade called Sister Rosemary, and she was an absolute terror. And I went back many, many years later and talked to one of my co-students from the time that later became a teacher at that same school. And I mentioned Sister Rosemary, and she said, "You wouldn't believe it. People are still talking about Sister Rosemary. She really created this amazing amount of trauma in her class."
Wow.
Enough that people were still remembered her name and were talking about her 30 years later. It's pretty incredible.
That is incredible.
That's kind of where I'd say my art practice started out, was as a resistance movement on a personal level. So I guess I saw some power in it, taking control. If you think about that pencil event, that's actually kind of a Fluxus event in a lot of ways, because it's an event score, drop pencil on the floor at 12:03 or something like that. And then spread the word around the whole classroom, and everybody's on board because she can't punish everybody.
Right.
At the same time. So, it's kind of funny. So then later in high school, my parents got a divorce probably when I was in ninth grade. I was still at a Catholic high school at that point. But then I went to public school after that and got to take, even in the Catholic high school, I took some art classes. They had peculiar ways of doing things. The this nuns, so, which was okay. But it wasn't until high school, I'd say, that I started getting straight up art instruction of how to do printmaking or, stuff they do in high school.
That they did in high school. I don't know if they do that anymore, which is unfortunate. Printmaking in high school seems like it would be very unusual.
It was still funded at that time.
Could you describe your work for people who haven't seen it yet? How would you characterize the work that you do from your perspective, not from, like a typical art critic review, but what do you hope to create with your work?
That's always a good question. I know listening to other artists, that they build up a kind of sense of long-term thing they're attempting to achieve. And, I probably thought like that when I was in my 30s and moving towards my 40s. Then, you go, well, what's my big statement and how am I going to make it to the top of the mountain? And what's the design of the flag I'm going to put on it? And, all that stuff. And, that's kind of a younger person's heroic effort. And it is heroic. There's no question about it, to try to tackle the mountain. And, you might make it to the top, you might not, doesn't really matter. But at my age, at 62, I've been doing this for 35 years professionally. And at a certain point, you start realizing what you really need to do is to be, you have to be relentless. You have to say, I'm going to start doing this and I'm not going to stop. That actually gives me some emotion for some reason, but I think of all the younger artists, and it's incredibly difficult to work your way up the hill. And no matter how far up the hill you get, it's still totally out of your control what's going to happen. So, in my case, I just go about my business on a daily basis and think out what I'm doing. And, for a lot of years, I stuck to a certain, since I said earlier that, I kind of came out of chaos. I couldn't even figure out how to sweep a pile of trash into the middle of the floor. I felt debilitated, really, as a 20-something-year-old. Lose my wallet every week or can't find my keys.
I'm curious about what you were saying earlier about the difference between, at least in your case, yourself as an artist in your 20s versus yourself as an artist in your 40s. Versus yourself as an artist now that you're in your 60s. It sounds like you went through the stage that we all go through of being an artist or trying to be an artist with a capital A and making this grand statement and deciding at 20 what your life vision is going to be and making it this big thing. Is that what you see other people doing, or is that what you felt like you were trying to do also?
I assume it's, the natural arc of what most artists in any field even, or heck, even in any career, really, they're shooting for what the high end of the standard is of their field, whatever that is. You could be a programmer, a designer, architect, a brain surgeon, whatever. You're trying to shoot for the top of your area. And I think everybody who's getting something done is striving for excellence. And excellence is the main cut point for everything. Is this the most excellent way this can be done? Is this the most elegant way it can be done? I heard you say in a different interview that a writer figures out how to say in 5 words what it used to took them 40 or 50 words to say the same thing. And I certainly went through that process also with writing of, really studying what 5 words could you use that actually says all 40 of those words. It's a lot about the elegance of that solution of expressing the most with the least means. As artists, when I was younger, I certainly thought of myself like a Marine wandering around in the jungle using whatever resources were around me to achieve my mission, whatever that is. And, I think artists are, kind of live by the same conquer the land you're standing on, attitude, and, which is a matter of resourcefulness. So we all have to be extremely resourceful in how we do things. There's a few artists that we see at the top of the food chain, so to speak, that, I call the 1% market. Those are the people that get all the attention and they have the money behind them and so forth. And it's, when you analyze it, it's just purely by luck that they happen to be particularly there at particularly the moment when somebody particularly thinks they can make something particular out of them. The rest of us, have to, and it's a good thing, we have to fend for ourselves and we have to make the struggle and develop the relationships with the people that, that we can develop a career with, like different art dealers or art consultants or, whatever it takes. or crowdfunding, or, I mean, there's a bunch of ways now that there didn't used to be in the 70s and 80s and 90s, which was when I was developing. But the advantage of that is you have control over your market, over your process, over all these things, and you're not under these economic pressures at the top end. I mean, it's a different set of pressures. I remember, you'll know Franz Klein, from the 50s. I remember reading something where Franz Klein kind of wanted to expand out, but he had developed such a brand with his black paintings that none of his gallery dealers would go for him adding color to it, which is kind of funny, because they knew they could sell the black ones because that's what they've been selling. And, so Franz Klein kind of ended up in a little bit of a stew over that. But, like in my case, I make these paintings that are I call them typographic abstractions, that are based on letters. And I started that, I don't know, back in the late 90s when I was moving to a different style than what I had been doing before that. And all of my dealers, for whatever reason, I mean, that's the thing that really turns them on, and that they see that as my brand, and everybody wants that. And
wants the work that you're doing now with the typography, or?
Yeah, that's the work that I show publicly in the galleries and so forth. However, behind the scenes, I do whatever I want on a daily basis. I started to say earlier, for a lot of years, like maybe say 28 to 38, I decided to spend a very long time only doing one angle. And then I kind of used John Cage's statement of do something until it's boring and then keep doing it. You'll start penetrating the barrier of that thing, and you'll start to see the subtlety of it. And then, it opens up new vistas of possibilities that on your own you wouldn't bother to look for unless you were plowing deeper and deeper and deeper into your practice. So I did that for 10 years, developed amazing concentration and focus and staying power to stick with it and stick with it and stick with it. Then on a certain day, I said, okay, I've accomplished that goal. I mean, it was basically a character development thing. And I think an artist, they can continuously alter their own character or personality by how they choose to work on their own art. So, once I felt like I had mastered that, then on a certain day, I realized that because of my memory of keeping going from the day before, that it was inhibiting what I could do the next day, because I would feel like I was forced into a specific railroad track that I had laid for myself into the future. So I said, okay, that's interesting, but that's starting to feel limiting, but I have achieved what I was going for, which is create these pieces with this certain look and then just keep digging deeper into it to see where it can go. Then on a certain day, I just said, okay, done. So then I made a new commitment that from that day forward, I would wake up fresh and forget anything that happened previously and just do whatever came to me. And if that happened to be continuing, great. But if I wanted to try something else, I'd spend all day or all week or all month trying out something else just to see what would happen.
I'm really interested in that concept that, the John Cage quote about keep going until it gets boring and then keep going even further. I understand the idea behind that. I was about to say the idea behind the idea. It allows you to, like you said, really get to know an impulse or a subject. I'm just kind of curious, and you're alluding to this. At what point do you know you've pushed past the boredom and got to the good stuff, and now it's time to move on because you've exhausted that idea? Do you have any sense of what to look for?
What to look for?
Meaning,
you were talking about two different gateways. I'm wondering which one you're talking about.
Oh, interesting. So on the one hand, let's say you have an idea and you start following that thread. and you get to a point where the way you described it is you hit that boredom. And the advice is to push through and go even deeper. And I understand that because that just makes sense to me that you would go past the point where you think you know the answer and keep digging until you really do, I guess.
How do you know that you've penetrated that first border, that first barrier?
Yeah, that first. So, yeah, I mean, I guess there's two questions. Like, how do you know you've penetrated that first barrier? But then also at a certain point, you've gone as deep as you can go, and it's legitimately time for you to explore a new idea.
Here's a problem. Artists have a lot of problems because it's one thing to learn how to use your tools, and it's another thing to develop your bunch of techniques. But it's another thing to explore your creativity, which are not the same things. Like I say, technique is required for being an artist, but technique does not make you creative. Creativity is something that's happening in your head. So a lot of the problem is, especially after we come out of school, we've got all this, stuff in our heads that we've learned. And frankly, 95% of it is going to get jettisoned within 3 years. And it was all only put in your head to begin with, just to give you options for what you might decide to do later. But mostly because all that stuff's in your head, it just mostly creates confusion and a lack of confidence about going forward. A lot of times you see people, I saw a guy like this one time. He has a salvage yard. He started this salvage yard. He only got through the 4th grade. So he only learned how to add and subtract and multiply and divide. And that's as far as he got with school. And he could sort of read stuff. But because of that simplicity of thought process, he could apply himself to doing something concrete that he understood, which was auto parts. So he started collecting cars on some piece of property, and within a few years, he could hire a mathematician or a accountant or a computer person or whatever to do the things that they could dream up to do because they had the education. But the guy ended up becoming a multimillionaire with the one thing that he could figure out, which was, I can take free auto parts from junky cars and sell them and make a profit. And that's all he needed to know for an entire lifetime of becoming a millionaire. So, artists kind of have the problem of having too many ideas in their head. And it's hard to parse it out into where they should put their attention because they can't be at peace without jettisoning or sacrificing the many things that they do know in order to focus on one thing that they can really comprehend.
Ooh, that's hard.
Yeah. And, that was a call I had to make at sometime in my 20s, that I have to sacrifice all the future potential of all these other different trails in order to pursue one that can actually get somewhere. It's like standing in the mountains and you have this big map of all these trails where you can go here, you can go there, but you can't go there. You can't go to all those places. You have to pick a trail and start walking and keep going. That's basically what it adds up to. So at a certain point, I follow my intuition and what seems to inspire me at any given moment. But I kind of keep myself in a cloistered state so that when I'm going out and looking at art, I'm seeing something fresh that I'm not already jaded by because I've seen it 3,000 times. If I want a fresh experience with art, I have to remain sequestered away visually from the endless amount of art you could be looking at. And then when you do decide to look, you're looking for very specific things, usually that are going to help you with what you're up to. Like when I go out and look at other people's art, I'm looking for solutions to certain problems that I'm thinking about. And so I'll go see, what did this guy do when he got to this element? How did he grapple with that problem? Or how did she pick this particular thing? And then how is she using it? And is her solution something that either I can use or that I think is a brilliant solution that I can add to how I think about the problem that I'm considering?
Can you give an example of that? Like an example of a problem that you were looking to solve and then who led you to the solution?
I'll just say an example that comes to mind. There was a certain Picasso painting that I was looking at, and I was thinking about shading and how shading works. And I think of the use of light and dark in my work as a way to organize a person's attention while they're looking at the work, to organize the space in the painting so that the light and dark establish. I usually only use it to amplify what's already there, not to make it do things that are unnatural. A lot of artists try to push their shading and their lighting kind of out beyond the believability point. And since my work is based on essentially flatness, I try to use the shading in such a way that it is encoding for how the parts are fit together and what's in front of what and what's behind what. So I do utilitarian shading and highlighting. I figure visual art is a language. So if you can use as many cliches as people already naturally understand, even though they don't know why, like Renaissance 10 o'clock light. If the highlighting and the shading is based on a diagonal of what the light is at 10 in the morning, which is the typical Renaissance angle, to get the maximum form out of light and shadow, you can't put light at certain angles and expect to end up with a believable form in terms of how the shading hits it and how the highlighting hits it. So again, like Picasso said, I lie to tell the truth. That he's manipulating and all of us do that, manipulating the space in the painting to make it talk into 3 dimensions. So I saw this little Picasso, and, of course, he was brilliant at a lot of things, even though he was kind of a nut, and he just did whatever the hell he dreamt up at any given time, and he liked it that way, and that's cool. And he never stopped. I mean, talk about relentless. Picasso was relentless in the studio. So anyway, I saw this little shape that, was maybe a part of a Cubist painting or something. And I just saw a little, of darkness under this square, and it wasn't attached to it. It was just a little mark of dark color that immediately, on a poetic level, you knew that that was the shadow of that shape, even though it in no way was made to look like it was the shadow of that shape. But Picasso knew on a poetic level that because of how people know how to read imagery, that they would immediately associate that with being the shadow of that shape. And to me, that was like pure brilliance. And that he had pushed the idea completely to the edge of readability. I mean, had it been in a slightly different place, you would no longer see it as associated to being a shadow of a form that's just above it. And that's a very subtle thing, to recognize that that's what he did and that it was just this kind of brilliant little move. And he's only talking to other painters when he did it. He was saying, here, check this out. What do you think? Did I nail that or what?
Right.
And only other painters can appreciate that. I mean, nobody else can appreciate it because nobody looks that close at anything. We all know from going to our first drawing class that we absolutely had been blind until we had to prove ourselves on a 2-dimensional surface of what we're seeing. And you start to draw things and you have all these assumptions in your head about how it is because you've never actually looked at something.
Right.
And then when you're forced into it, you have to edit this thing and you're trying to capture that leaf or that whatever it is. And you go, holy crap, I have absolutely no idea how to see that thing. Let me keep looking at it. And all of a sudden you go, oh, wow, I don't think I've ever seen anything before.
Right.
And you go, I've lived all the way up till now completely blind. I never, I just see a bunch of fuzz around me. I've never actually thought about it. And that's the thing about painting and anybody else in any field is that once you become conscious of your complete ignorance of everything around you, then all of a sudden, at the age of 20 something, you're reborn. I mean, you go, oh my God, look at that. Oh my God, I never saw that before. Or look how the light, like when I'm looking at this bush and there's 10,000 leaves on it, how can I tell one from another? What's causing those shadows to hit that thing a certain way that everyone's distinct? It's like mind-blowing. How does all that work? And then every artist comes up with his own set of laws of how to make that transpose onto a two-dimensional surface, but you have to understand it. You can't just paint a bunch of things on a surface and say, oh, there's all the leaves. No, not really. Look a little closer.
No, I've got this huge smile on my face because I was sitting yesterday. I went to the lake. My husband was fishing and I'm just sitting there looking at this. I'm not sure what kind of a pine tree it is. Actually, I should probably look it up. Speaking of seeing things, but just the way that the shapes of the leaves and the branches were creating this really interesting pattern. And if you just glance at it, you think that you can paint it with the way that you first express that, like just all these marks and stuff. And then you realize like, no, these are like wedges that are coming in that were shaped by the wind. And then it's different over here because that other giant tree was blocking the wind. And you start to see all that stuff and then try to put it on a 2D surface and
yeah, the 2D surface is the thing that's telling you, no, you didn't see that very well. I have to look closer. It's like a sound check. You think you see that. Okay, now try to get that translated into two dimensions and you'll see how much you don't see that.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're assuming things. You're assuming 99% of the things you're looking at. So as a young guy, I mean, I started penetrating pretty deeply into what I was seeing around me. And I don't know if you ever had the experience where all of a sudden I realized, wait a second, if I'm looking out of this eye, everything's kind of blue. And if I'm looking out of this eye, everything's kind of red. What's causing that to happen? And later, when they come up with 3D vision glasses, you go, oh, that's so I can see in 3D. Wow, that's pretty cool. Because if both of your eyes saw the same color, you wouldn't see in 3 dimensions. It just looked flat.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So, which is exactly what they're exploiting in a 3D movie is the blue is seeing one thing and the red is seeing a different thing. And since your eyes are ever so far apart, it's just enough to create stereo vision. So that's what gives the 3D effect to our vision is that one eye is seeing more blue tones and the other eye is seeing more reddish tones. So I discovered that and I went, wow, that's pretty cool. Nobody has ever told me that before. This was like in the 70s.
I've never heard it explained that way.
Yeah, well, if you do that, you're in a room that's white or something and just experiment with the one eye for like 10 seconds and then do the other eye. And you go, oh, wow, that's 2 different colors. One's blue and I think your left one's more like blue and the other one's more like reddish. But I mean, it takes a lot of contemplating and thinking and trying to be observant to notice that. So life for an artist, if they're really going to be good at it, you first have to develop the tools of your mind and your actual eyeballs and what they're doing. We think of optics or whatever, but I mean, it's your own direct experience that is going to tell you, oh, look at that. I never saw that before. And when you see the things you've never seen before, then you're actually making some improvements as an artist. Your acuity is deepening, and
yeah,
you're becoming a kind of a mystic in a certain way because, you're a seer. You can see things. And even if it's only just the physical world, until we actually are putting attention consciously on something, we don't see it at all. It's kind of like the phenomenon if you buy a brand new red something, a red car, and you go, wow, I love that color. That's me. And then you start driving around and then you go, oh, wait a minute. There's like 100 other red cars just like mine that I never saw before. So that kind of attention that you're putting on a specific thing makes you see all the elements of that specific thing all around you. But if you're not looking for that, you don't see it. It's not conscious.
Yeah, I was just listening to this, I don't know if it's a philosopher, but I think kind of a behavioral scientist who was talking about the fact that we, almost exactly what you were just saying, just in a different context, that we're blind to what we're not focused on. And you might have heard this. I think it's a kind of a famous study, psychological study they did where they brought these subjects into a room and they had them watch a videotape of two guys passing a basketball back and forth to each other. And they told them, we want you to just watch this video and count how many times they pass the ball back and forth. And most of the subjects, when they were done, said, yeah, they did it 15 times. And then the scientist or the person conducting the study said, okay, but did you see the gorilla? And they're like, what? They had a guy walk in to the room in a gorilla suit directly behind where they were passing the ball. He stops, starts pounding his chest and just acting like a crazy gorilla. And then he turns around and walks out. Less than half of the people who were taking that study saw the guy in the gorilla suit because they were focused on the ball. So then they continue to do all these studies and stuff. And it's basically like, you won't see those things unless that guy walked in front of the ball, in front of the thing that you were focused on. They also did another study, which is mind blowing, but they had subjects in a restaurant sitting at a restaurant counter, and the waiter or the waitress comes up and takes their order. And then, how they have the counter. And so then they lean down to pick something up and another person pops back up. Most people don't notice. Yeah. They don't notice if it was started as a man and then it was a woman. They don't notice if the first person was white and the second person was black. They don't notice because they're not expecting it. It's so crazy.
Well, I've seen them do that in a video in New York City where some guy is fully engaging the person and they're talking and he's asking directions on how to get someplace. And then these two guys walk between them with a window or something that you can't see through. And then as soon as he comes out the other side, a completely different person continues to ask directions. And the guy that they're asking directions from does not even notice that it's not the same person, even if they have a different voice and everything else.
Yeah. It's incredible what we don't see. We are so blind. And so to your point about artists and what we see and what we train ourselves to see, we are mystics in that sense. We spend decades looking at things that nobody else will look at. And so when we show that to other people, they're blown away.
Because they've never seen it before. Well, and the chances are they still don't even see your painting. That's a problem. Sometimes I watch people when they come in our house. I'll just watch them, how their eye moves around. And a lot of people, they'll just walk straight from the front door. They'll go through the living room. They'll go into the kitchen to who they're focused on, which might be my wife, and, to bring something for a dinner or something. And virtually they saw nothing whatsoever in the entire space from when they walked in the door to when they got to the kitchen. They didn't see anything. And they don't look around. And then you can also tell if it's an artist, they'll actually kind of glance at things as they're going along to see, what's in this room. And, oh, look at that. There's a cool painting. I'll have to check that out in a minute. So if it's artists, you'll actually, they'll usually take an accounting of where they're at and what they're passing through. But even like that, some don't. I mean, like you said, they've got an idea on their mind that they want to deliver this thing to that place over there. And anything that happens between the front door and getting to that point, they didn't experience. They only have the one idea on their mind to put this plate down over there in the kitchen.
And part of that is out of necessity, I think, because our brains are getting thousands of billions of signals every second. And if we didn't have some sort of a filter, I think we would go crazy. And that's,
we would.
Yeah. They've done those things where they've had this, amazing breakthrough, right? Where they have been able to give some people who've been deaf their entire lives, all of a sudden they can hear. And you've seen those videos or you've seen that where the person hears for the first time and it's amazing. But what they haven't really shown is most of the time, just a few months later, those same people will ask, can you take this out? I can't handle it. Because when we're babies, we learn how to filter. And as an adult, it's really hard to learn that filter.
And there are people, that have been listening their whole life, but they develop a problem of not being able to not take in all the sounds around them for some reason. And so they don't like to go to restaurants or whatever because the person they're sitting next to, they can't really hear them because their voice is in the mix of 1,000 other sounds they're hearing at exactly the same time, and they can't distinguish them apart from each other. And that's, so maybe we should be happy that we're able to block out a whole lot of things so that we can focus on whatever thing it is we're trying to focus on in a given minute. So, talking about the gorilla, the chances are those people that noticed the gorilla actually counted the ball bouncing once or two times less than the other people that didn't see the gorilla. Because while they were looking at the gorilla, they missed a count.
I bet you're right.
Yeah, because they only saw 14 bounces, not 15, because they looked up at the gorilla and they thought about it and that they missed a count.
I bet you're right about that.
I'd like to hear that part of the statistic, that of the ones that saw the gorilla, how accurate was their 15 count?
That is an excellent question. I bet we could find it somewhere. I'm going to look for it now.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because, a lot of these scientific studies, they have the same problem. They're looking for a specific thing, and they miss all the other things that are happening because of the particular kind of evidence they're looking for. So it doesn't even cross their mind that maybe 10 other really interesting things are going on, but they don't even see it because that's not the focus of the experiment. It's a tough one because you want to stay focused, but on the other hand, you want to be taking in other things that you otherwise, something completely new can dawn on you if you can open your attention enough. But, I work on certain paintings that I call music paintings, like symphonic studies. And, one painting I worked on for 15 years, actually.
Wow. I thought I worked on things long when it was a year or 2 years, but 15.
15 years, yeah. Like I started it in 1996. And quite frankly, I still haven't varnished it because I still might want to do something else to it. But because that was one project I thought of was, what if you do a painting where you just keep working on it every time you dream up something different that could happen, just keep looking at it until you become dissatisfied with a certain piece and then fix that. And then just, how long can you look at something and still find things you want to change or shift or whatever? It's got certain rules built into it that I came up with, and you think of music, it happens over time, right? So that's a problem in painting, you think. that a painting, when you see it, it happens all at once, right? I mean, there's the whole image, and you take it in, and you go, okay, well, so where's the time element here? But then as I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I contemplated it, and I looked at this painting, and I considered the painting, then I thought, oh, wait a second, here, look at this. My focal point's actually only that big at almost any distance, which means everything around it is out of focus, which means until I moved my focus point here, I didn't see the thing that was right here. I can hold my finger here and you can see my chin. I mean, I can do this right now. Here's my chin, you see it, but you don't see my glasses that are right here. Now you do. But wait a second, what about my hair right here? Or what about, the palettes in the background? Or maybe that piece up there. It's all just fuzz until your attention goes to it. Not only your attention, but your focal point. Your focal point and your attention have to go to the same place, or else you don't see it. So that tells me, oh, so if I make paintings that are designed to move a person's focal point around a certain way, that as they follow the lines in the painting with their focal point, they'll start to see that the thing is shifting and changing and other things are interpenetrating it. And it's going this way and it's going that way, and that you could look at it actually for months before you've actually witnessed the entire painting with focus. You think you do, but actually a painting is made up of thousands of focal moments that you're remembering together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but...
No, I'm very quiet right now because my brain is just exploding inside right now. I'm just like...
Yeah, but think about that. I mean, there's the focal point, and if your focal point's not on a certain spot and your attention is not with it, with the focal point, you don't see it, that you can remember it. So if you make a painting and it's all about how you're moving the focal point of the viewer around the painting, most people will not see 99% of your painting. They'll just have a kind of a peripheral vision sense of what it looks like. And that's all they know about it. Oh, it's kind of bluey colored and it's supposed to be icebergs. And, it seems like it's got a lot of space in it, but I don't really know because I've never actually seen the painting, even though I'm standing in front of it, because I've never actually gone in and looked at all the little parts and where is that? Oh, look how that goes up this way. Wait a second. It's changing colors. Oh, wow. Now let me step back. Oh, yeah. Super cool. But, if you can't get people to do that, they're not going to have the great experience of your painting that you had while you were painting it. You think, oh, man, people are going to love this little thing I'm doing right here. No, they're never going to see it.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, that's the process part of it. It's like, that's the part that to me is exciting, that allows me to spend a year or two making a painting. And then as you discovered when you were looking at that Picasso, it almost takes an artist to see those moments and those details.
Yeah, absolutely. And people suffer from this incredible visual ignorance that they don't even realize that they're under. So this is one of the things I'm saying with the typographic abstraction pieces. Okay, when a person makes a discovery of seeing one of my paintings, let's say out in the wild, so to speak, at an art gallery, I want them to see something they actually never saw before. What is this thing? And I have to actually look at it and what's going on here? And they look around and they go, oh, what's going on with this? Look, there's like dictionary paper behind the paint. What word is that? Oh, wow, what is this? This is like a bunch of letters or something. I'm trying to drop something on them that they really have no clue how to look at. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the idea of words and letters and language and pointing out that when you're looking at a book and you're reading it, it's a representational experience, like looking at a representational painting. You're looking past the words. You don't even see the words. You're looking past the words to the ideas that are coming into your head from the clusters of words that are on the page, but you're not actually looking at the words or the letters or anything else. You're just feeling the ideas going into your mind that clusters of words create these images in your head, and you go, oh, there's the story. Oh, I'm getting the pattern. Oh, I understand it. Okay, so with me, I want to completely disrupt that sense of representationalism. Even if I'm using some kind of representational signs of bits of letters or light and shadow or painting surfaces, I'm combining all these different things together that all different people are only focused on one element of it. They're only focused on the surface because it's very interesting looking, the paint. Other people are only looking at the graphic design of how the letters are fitting on there. Other people are trying to figure out what's in the background there that this guy covered over with paint. I'm seeing these bits of paper of something. And so, I wanted to have like these many, many layers of activity going on, that even though the whole thing is very simple and very beautiful and very clean, that once you start penetrating into it, you go, oh my God, there's like this entire world of things going on here that you don't see at the beginning. So I think of my paintings like one of those 12-hour release contact capsules, that you only get a little bit at each time you look at it, that only dissolves at a certain rate, so that you're not completely freaked by the entire thing all at once. I want my paintings to look like you get it right away, and you go, I never saw anything like this before, but I understand that it's blue or it's whatever, and that it's some kind of letters, maybe. So it gives you a hook. You have a hook into the piece. But then if you look at it longer, then you start seeing the shading. And why does this look three-dimensional? A lot of my paintings, when I first started making them, because the three-dimensionality in modernist paintings has been completely obliterated, because they didn't want to associate themselves with the 1800, the Academy people. So artists just wanted to tear the entire system down and reconstruct it themselves and completely obliterate everything that had been done up until their time period of, say, the 1910s and 20s.
There's that artist resistance.
Yeah. So the dark underbelly of the Academy was the representationalism, and how they had exhausted the value of that by making all these stupid paintings about who knows what, and trying to include literature and sexy women, and what does that mean? And it just started becoming, in a certain way, pornographic. The literature had been kind of abused, and the classics and whatnot. So, I think at a certain point, with all the new technology that was developing in the early let's say 1905, 1888, whatever, new generations of artists were coming up, and they just, I don't know, that's just not cutting it anymore. We got to do something else. And these guys are holding all the power, and they're not giving us any power. So we're just going to take our own damn power by cutting off their heads. Then you start seeing everybody running around with a cut off head. And that's the avant-garde, and that's what they did. So in order to ensure that they became supreme, they had to eliminate all of the techniques that these guys were using and just go back to the primitive roots of art, of just the most basic elemental things, and then reconstruct the world starting there, like Malevich, and not Picasso so much, because, he still was sort of a gatekeeper of the old way, because he had risen up pretty well. And he still wanted to keep a lot of the qualities of the older school. But of course, he tore them up into little pieces, because that's the only way he could make the jokes work, is if there was an audience that understood him. So it depended on the conventions that were already in existence for you to then revolt against them.
Right. To understand that there was even a revolt.
Exactly. Right. So it'd be kind of like the Buddha. the Buddha happens. He's he's already, dwelling in the infinite, and his mind is sitting there, and he can just be completely quiet, and the entire universe is rolling around his head. And
we're back to the start of the conversation about chaos.
He still has to see how he can say a few things that will snap in somebody's head, and so Picasso and all those guys, they were trying to find those kind of, what's the little wedge I can use to completely turn over the entire building? So I think that's what a lot of the early 20th century is about.
What do you think is happening now?
Well, I think in a certain way we got lost.
Nobody's getting our jokes anymore, Cecil.
I know. Well, World War II is what kind of killed it. The massive migration of everybody, the complete disruption of all political systems in Europe. And then when you start throwing on the rise of commercialism and mass communication, global communication, it's just put us in this deluge of information that nobody can really wrap their head around. So I think artists in general are just kind of, they do stuff, but we're basically in the tsunami floating along on a piece of wood, hoping to figure out what we're going to do once the water recedes. I mean, we're still probably at least a generation away from that. To come back to something that we can recognize as a stable future technologically, we're still in the construction zone, and we don't know what the building's going to look like. I remember, when I first started getting involved with the internet around 1994, I didn't even know what the hell a gigabyte was. What the hell is that? I mean, it was kind of a new invention at the time. I mean, there was some megabytes, and you sort of understood that, and that was based on some kilobytes, but gigabyte, a terabyte? The hell is it? How much room?
Yeah, you just had these disks, like a 5 megabyte disk was such a big deal. That was like, and the box for it was, like gigantic. And now you get.
Yeah, I had this sensei. I studied Japanese martial arts back in the 90s. And I had this sensei who was real into computer stuff. And so he was advancing up to a 486 at the time. And so he had a 386. And so he gave me his 386 for, I don't know, $100 or whatever, that he probably paid $2,000 for it at the time. And then
probably more,
maybe more, 2,500. He was kind of well off. But anyway, he gave me this thing and he set it up and he goes, okay, there it is. So I'm looking at it and I'd never used a computer before. So I'm looking at the thing and I'm trying to figure out where's the on button on this thing. He goes, oh, that's back here. And he reaches behind the computer and flips a button that's on the back. And I said, what the hell is wrong with these guys putting the button on the back? Why would you do that? That doesn't even make any sense. The button on the back to turn it on?
It's like putting the ignition in the trunk.
Yeah, let's go to the trunk and turn on the ignition so we can drive the car. So right off the bat, I was like, I'm in some world I don't get, I mean, even the TV has the button on the front. So from there, I slowly started to try to understand what the internet was. And back then it was still all AOL and CompuServe for the most part. It was just.
And the modem starting up, that beautiful noise.
Yeah. And it was so pitiful.
It was magical. We'd never had anything like that before. Like, I remember the very first time I went online and I was just like, this is
amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I was just like, I remember that noise. It was scary because all of a sudden my computer wasn't mine anymore. Like, I remember feeling that this is a gateway to something else. It's not just item on my desk.
Maybe you remember, but everybody always used to complain about getting surfer's butt from sitting at the computer for 12 hours straight trying to get to the end of the internet and your butt goes numb. From spending way too much time, because at that time we still didn't have the idea that we didn't have to follow every link we saw.
And you didn't have to open every email either.
You didn't have to open every email. Yeah. So I mean, it took a long time for us. It was like seeing for the first time.
And for the technology to advance, I think part of the reason why we had internet, but was because everything took so damn long, you know? Click, wait.
Yeah, and if you remember,
Page
I
is
mean, at the
loading.
time, life was still slower, and however long it took seemed like it was okay. It didn't seem like a long time for some reason.
Now look at us, Cecil. We're all impatient. If that page takes more than half a second to load, I'm gone.
Oh yeah, and I watch my daughter. She's 23, and she'll hit something. If it doesn't immediately go there, she's like hitting it 20 times. Like, what the hell's wrong with this thing? It's not working. Not working. How come it's not going anywhere? you know, but she's keeping it from going someplace by keep hitting the button.
Reloading it.
Yeah, reload, reload, reload. I think it's funny, because we've become incredibly impatient. The entire culture is suffering from ADD to the extreme. And, nobody can keep their attention more than about 6 seconds or maybe 8. And since our minds are flitting around like a bee going from one flower to the next, gathering a microscopic amount of pollen so we can move on to the next one.
Yeah.
It's creating difficulties, lack of concentration.
Absolutely. I mean, we loved Lawrence of Arabia, that movie. Loved it.
Right.
I can't sit through that movie now. Just like within the first 3 minutes, I'm like, oh, come on. Can we just get past this desert scene? Like, I got it. There's a desert. Let's move.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we could have saw 7 movies in this much time.
I know. Yeah, and that movie is like 4 hours long, and it has an intermission, and everything's like really slow paced. I don't remember what movie it was, but my husband and I were watching a movie the other day that I loved, and I remember just going like, oh my gosh, the intro credits are taking forever. And I caught myself and I was like, oh God.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes when my daughter was younger, we'd go to the movies and you'd watch all the trailers. I go, well, that was it, I guess.
Let's go. We're
Yeah.
done.
Oh yeah, we're here to see something. I forgot what it was. But, they take all the best scenes out of the movie. They play them really fast on the trailer. And, later you kind of feel like, I think I saw that movie already. And the rest of it's just filler, basically, right? So, they showed you all the exciting parts already.
We're terrible.
It's getting to be a tough world on filmmakers and everybody else. And painters, I mean, filmmakers, people are accustomed to watch things. So they watch films. But people aren't accustomed to look at things.
To stop and look, right? We're fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, we're moving from a looking culture to a watching culture. And nobody expects to actually see anything when they're watching something. They're just expecting to see a pattern going across a screen. Or, if you're at a park, you're just watching the pattern of things happening. You're not actually looking directly at anything.
Well, I think people are expecting someone to tell them where to look and what to do as opposed to discover it.
Yeah, it's passive. It's not active looking. When my girls were younger, I have an older daughter too, and when they were like 10 and 2 maybe, I'd have to watch the same movie over about 300 times. Like Sleeping Beauty or who knows what.
Little Mermaid.
Attack from Mars. I don't know if you saw that one. But I probably watched that 100 times. And I had never watched a movie more than once before that. I thought, I've already seen that movie. I don't need to see it again. But then when I'm watching it with the girls, and of course, they either completely forget everything they already saw, or they just want to see it again. So I just sit there and watch it with them. And then all of a sudden, kind of like watch it till it's boring and then keep watching. You start to go, oh, wait a second. Look at that guy in the background doing that thing. Funny. I didn't catch that the first 28 times.
Yeah.
Oh, look over there. Look at what this guy is doing. Watch how she does that little move.
Hey, look, there's a gorilla.
Yeah, right. Look, there's a gorilla back there, too. But I mean, you might have to watch a movie 100 times to really kind of catch that level of the detail of it, which is what a filmmaker would wish you're doing. Watch his movie 100 times instead of the next 100 movies that you're only going to watch once. So it's tough. Plus, we're all up against the poverty of time. We only have 24 hours a day and so many years. So No matter how much money you make, you still only get the same number of seconds in one lifetime.
True. True. So that's all the more reason to be very, very clear and careful in what you do with them.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're just going by tick, tick, tick. And so, how you decide to use those, artists sort of have the idea that, well, I want to use them, exploring, my world, not just developing somebody else's world.
Absolutely. And not being passive about it.
Yeah, to actually stand up and be clear about, but like, I watched your video about your GoFundMe page to go to.
Oh, you saw that one,
Yeah.
The Kickstarter video.
Yeah, you look like some other person. You don't look like you at all. It's just amazing. I mean, the amount of growth you've done since 2014 is pretty spectacular. I mean,
yeah.
You look like you were kind of afraid to be on the video, and you don't know how these guys are going to deal with it.
Absolutely. That's why that movie is silent, is because I had to make that movie, which is ironic that I'm doing a podcast now. It's so funny to me. But the reason why
I found it on YouTube. I listened.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's on YouTube with those two guys. And you were talking about your trip down to Argentina.
Oh, I know. Okay. I know what you saw. Okay. Yeah. I know what you saw. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a hangout that I did with Carlos. Yes. I remember that one. Oh my God. That's funny. But I thought you were talking about the Kickstarter movie, and I made that one as a silent movie because I was too afraid to talk on camera.
I haven't seen that one. I'll have to watch for it. That sounds good. But like, with that Kickstarter thing you did, it's so overwhelming amount of effort you've got to put into something to get everybody's attention long enough to pull it off. And then, the grueling effort that has to go in, which we all put in on our paintings, although we actually enjoy that, but so it doesn't quite seem like work. But when you're trying to, like you said, beg money from people to go do a project that you're not really sure they even care about, all of us artists are living under that kind of problem all the time. We have to convince our families that we're supposed to be doing this and that they should support it. I don't know, somebody said, maybe somebody else on one of your podcasts, that they work pretty much 9 to 5. And I decided that, when I decided this is what I'm going to do and nobody's going to stop me, is if people think you're an artist and you're just doing your thing, then they think you're just wasting your time anyway. So you can come and help me move my furniture, or you can come and do this, or, since I have to work, then you can go do that for me. And they just eat your time up because they don't think your time's being well used.
That's why you have to be vigilant and relentless, like you said.
Yeah. So what I did was I said, well, I'm going to do this so that other people understand that it's a business. So I'm going to go into the studio religiously at 8 in the morning or whatever it is, and I'm going to work till 5. And even if I just go in my studio and take a nap, nobody's going to know that. But they're going to think I'm working when I might actually just be doing research, reading a book, or I might not feel like painting right now, but, I'm in my studio. And the first thing was to establish that people understand you're at work.
Yeah, for sure.
And you don't even have to tell them what you're doing. You just say, well, working in the studio, just like you're at your job. I don't ask you what the hell you do all day. And whatever I'm doing is top secret. I don't let anybody know what I'm doing.
Good for you.
This is like special stuff. No, you can't see it. And I'm mostly saying that because actually I didn't do anything today. But I was in my studio. So number one, artists have to create a designated space and time on a daily basis, or else
you have to have that routine.
They won't arrive. They won't arrive to their space to actually make things happen if they don't have a dedicated place and a dedicated time. I call it crucifying. You're crucifying time and space so that spot in the middle is right exactly there, and you have to go to it, and it's there all the time, but you have to arrive. If you don't get there, nothing ever gets done. And if it's not a pattern, then it's always in a state of chaos. And, that's what I figured out.
Excellent. Cecil, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad we got to...
Oh, you mean we're finished? I didn't think we got to anything yet. I thought we were waiting.
But you knew we were recording this, right?
Oh, yeah. I remember you saying something about that. I hope that was okay.
It was excellent.
Oh, good. Well, yeah, there's bound to be something in there that another artist could say, oh, yeah, I should think about that. I don't know.
I think there's a lot in there that they're going to be like thinking about.
Okay, well, very good. I'm so proud of what you're doing. You're doing a fantastic job. It's just very impressive. Keep going, and I hope that there's a lot of artists that are availing themselves in their studio to listening to your podcast and taking your workshops. And that's really fantastic because everybody's got to have a leg up, and you certainly seem like you're providing that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for spending so much time with me.
You bet.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Savvy Painter podcast with Cecil Touchon. Go to savvypainter.com and click on the podcast link to see show notes for this episode. You'll find examples of Cecil's work, links to connect with him, and links to any artists that we mentioned. So until the next time, this is Antrese Wood with the Savvy Painter podcast. Thank you so much for listening.